Well, to start with, I wish everybody also in the audience a very good afternoon. And we're going to start today officially, and therefore I open this academic ceremony in which Ms. Afrah Malik will defend her academic thesis entitled Bridging the Gap, Developing Screening Tools for Early Detection of Carotid Artery Disease. May I invite you, Ms. Candidate, to present a summary of your study and the conclusion of your thesis in the next 15 minutes.
Thank you, Director. Dear esteemed opponent of the assessment committee, dear promoters, dear colleagues, family, and friends, welcome. In the next few minutes, I will give you a brief summary of my thesis that I've been busy with in the last 4 years. I would like to start my talk by stating that cardiovascular diseases are the world's #1 killer. These diseases have two main risk factors, including obesity, unhealthy diet, physical inactivity, smoking, hypertension, and diabetes, among others. Between these diseases, I will focus on two. When the heart beats, it ejects blood to all our body parts through a network of vessels that is organized in a way you have large elastic arteries closer to the heart, and you have smaller arteries away from the heart. The elastic arteries are quite important, as when blood is ejected through them, they expand, store a certain amount of blood, and then they recoil during diastole. This way, they smoothen out the flow that is coming from the blood, from the heart. These arteries might stiffen, and when the arteries stiffen, they basically distend less. Arterial stiffening had a lot of negative consequences on the heart and on the circulation in general, and it's a predictor of cardiovascular diseases in the early stages. The other disease I would like to talk about is atherosclerosis, and in this case, in the carotid artery that is supplying the brain. Atherosclerosis happens when the arterial wall accumulates fatty deposits, cholesterol, among other substances that are collectively called as a plaque. This plaque might lead to stenosis, so a narrowing in the artery, in this case, compromising the blood flow to the brain. The other complication that might happen is that the plaque might get vulnerable, so it might trigger the formation of a blood clot that might travel downstream, blocking an artery with a smaller diameter in the brain, hence leading to cell death and consequent stroke. And a stroke is one of the most important cardiovascular diseases. So we get back to statistics. Every year, around 2.5 million deaths happen due to cardiovascular diseases. However, more than 70% of these diseases occur in low and middle income countries. So there is indeed a big gap between high income countries and low income countries when it comes to cardiovascular burden. When the World Health Organization tried to explain this difference, or this gap, they say that there is a lack of access to essential healthcare services in these countries. There is a lack of financial resources for imaging equipment, and there is a scarcity of trained imaging professionals. So when I try to make sense of that, and if we collect all these into one, which is limited healthcare services, together with the already existing high cardiovascular disease rate in these countries, this would lead to a late presence to the hospital. That would lead to premature deaths, which in turn would lead to loss in productivity, which in turn would lead to poverty. And poverty comes with too many complications, such as limited access to healthy food and limited access to preventive healthcare services, and exposure to environmental factors, such as air pollution, and also vulnerability toward behavioral risk factors, such as smoking. So this way, poverty would lead to more cardiovascular disease rate, and it would further limit the access to healthcare services. So if you think about this, it's actually a cycle that each element of it reinforces and fuels the next. So what I try to do in this thesis is try to break this cycle by contributing to the healthcare services in these countries via the development of screening tools that are accessible, affordable, and require minimal training. In order to develop a screening tool, you follow a cycle that is called the development cycle for medical devices. So you start in the conceptual phase. In that phase, you have an idea basically about the device. You could use modeling during that phase to see if your idea is feasible or not. If it's feasible, you develop the device. If it's not feasible, you improve the idea basically. In the next phase, development phase, you could use the combination of modeling and Bayesian studies to see if your device is ready or not. If it's ready, you move to the next phase, to the product phase, and if it's not, you keep developing the device. In the product phase, you could use more Bayesian studies. And in the last phase, in the end-of-life phase, and when the device doesn't really function anymore, you could use modeling to switch, to answer the question as how to switch to a new device. This is how I implemented this cycle in my thesis. So in the first phase, the conceptual phase, we had an idea about a device for arterial stiffening. Development and product phase, we were busy with a device for atherosclerotic stenosis. In the last phase, end of life, it was a device for arterial stiffening. Starting by the first phase. So arterial stiffening is the current existing modality for measuring arterial stiffening is ultrasound. So what you basically do is you try to track the motion of the artery via a modality we called a multiple M-line ultrasound. So thinking of a device that could be simpler, we thought of what if we use single M-line instead of multiple M-line? How would this perform in comparison with multiple M-lines? And to answer this question, we use data from the Maastricht study, 500 patients. So we compared the two methods basically for arterial dimensions and for stiffness indices. So if you see this graph, you have in the x-axis you have the mean, y-axis you have the difference. So if there is no method, if there is no difference between the two methods, you would get such dots, like no difference at all. In our case, we got such distribution of the differences within the limit of agreement, which was acceptable. At this point, I concluded that single M-line approach shows good agreement with multiple M-line approach in measuring carotid dimensions and stiffness indices. Right, moving to the next phases, development and product phase. And this is about atherosclerotic stenosis. So atherosclerotic stenosis is diagnosed in the hospital with ultrasound again. And when we think about how it does that, if we have a normal section of the vessel, typically the flow is what we call laminar flow. So the flow is rather smooth, in lines, you have fairly low velocities. When atherosclerotic stenosis is present in the vessel, you get higher velocities. You get change in direction. You get a lot of things, unstable flow, we call it. So it's a bit of a chaos. And by duplex ultrasound, so you look basically at the geometry of the vessel and you look at the flow as well. You could look at all that. So one of the parameters, for example, is velocity. If it exceeds a certain threshold, we could indicate a severe stenosis. But what happens inside is reflected on the outside. So everything is happening in the artery level, is transmitted to the skin. So the pulse, when the pulse is passing through the artery, when the flow is passing, and also the chaos, the turbulence, is also propagated to the skin. And by using laser Doppler vibrometer, we could detect these vibrations on the skin level. So can LDV does that? Can the laser Doppler vibrometer do that? Before running to do clinical studies, we thought of doing an in vitro study. So we had an elastic tube. We gave it a pulsatile flow. We checked the flow with Doppler ultrasound, with duplex. And then we created a stenosis in the tube. We measured with the laser, looked at our signal. There was something like that. So the question that we were trying to answer here is how a signal that was originating from stenosis would differ from a signal in a normal tube without stenosis in it. To answer this question, I gave my signals to the computer, developed an algorithm, extracted 10 features, all of which could detect severe stenosis with varying strength. I took these features with me, came to the hospital, included a patient who had recent disturbances in their blood flow to the brain. So they experienced a recent, what we call transient ischemic attack. It's basically a mini stroke. Or they were prepared for a surgery to remove the block. Included 94 patients, measured with the laser and with electronic stethoscope. And I measured with the electronic stethoscope as well because the traditional stethoscope was used previously to detect carotid stenosis, but it had poor performance, inconsistent performance. So I thought of the electronic stethoscope could be used as alternative that is potentially better than the traditional stethoscope. So got my signals, extracted the features, combined all these features together in a logistic regression model. When I looked at the performance of my devices, here what you see, we just focus on the things on the diagonal basically. So the sensitivity is how good the device in detecting the positives, the people with the stenosis, and the specificity is how good it is in detecting the negatives. So as you see here, the electronic stethoscope was performing better than LDV, but the performance of LDV itself was quite acceptable for a screening setting. All right, moving to the end-of-life phase. During a study, a longitudinal study, and a longitudinal study is just basically a study where you measure a patient now, and you measure him after a certain amount of time to see what changes has happened in the meanwhile. So we were measuring the arterial stiffness by a scanner called the MyLab 70. Midway, the device stopped working. So the obvious thing here is just call the company, ask them to fix it. At that point, they say, well, no, we cannot really fix it. That's an old model. Why don't you use one of our new versions? So at that point, we had no other options but to switch to a newer model, a new device, midway during a study. But before switching to the new device, we wanted to make sure that we wanted to check if there is bias between the two devices that we should be aware of, basically. So we did comparison between the two scanners using an static tube. We measured the diameter and the wall thickness. And we also used an eccentric wheel. An eccentric wheel is just a wheel, basically, that rotates but also moves up and down. So we were interested in the up and down motion here. So we compared the two scanners in terms of the motion of the wheel and the diameter and the wall thickness. We found that the motion of the wheel is equal, diameter and wall thickness are not. And I did the same comparison with similar scanners, identical MyLab 1 systems, and I had the same conclusion. So eventually my conclusion was that longitudinal studies switching between devices should perform a preliminary comparison to estimate potential biases between their devices. Would like to wrap up. So getting back to the device development cycle, the single M line is now a device that is functioning, validated, and is used in research and in community studies worldwide. Laser double vibrometer was supported by an algorithm that gave us an insight about the performance for stenosis. The same algorithm was used with the electronic stethoscope, and we got an idea about the performance of the electronic stethoscope that was better than the traditional stethoscope. And with the advent of new technologies, all technologies are typically abandoned. So in the last study, what I wanted to stress on is that if you are doing a study in the middle of which you have to switch to a new device, you have to compare between these devices. So by developing screening tools for the early detection of cardiovascular diseases, this thesis had made a modest yet meaningful contribution toward bridging the gap. And with that, I would like to give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you very much, Ms. Malik. Thank you very much, Ms. Candidate, for your very clear presentation. And I would like to compliment you that you also stay exactly within time, which is very good. Before I proceed, I'm going to present to the audience 5 names. And I'll start with myself. I'm Professor Steinbusch, the pro-rector, and today I'm assisted by Professor Koos, who is sitting here beside me. But more importantly, we have the promotion team who are sitting opposite of me. And we start here, the 3 members, and I start on my right, maybe it's your right too. It's Dr. Racing. He is Associate Professor in Biomedical Engineering. In the middle, Professor Mess. He's Professor in Clinical Neurophysiology. And the first promoter is Professor Delhaas, and he's Professor in Biomedical Engineering. And they had brought the candidate since 2020 that she can present today her thesis, and she's going to defend her thesis. I'm also pleased to mention to you here, audience, that we have 6 members here in the Corona, so there will be 6 members of who will ask questions to you, and they are all present here on site. So without further ado, we're going to start, and we're going to start with the chairwoman of the assessment committee. It's Professor Staals, and she is Professor in Neurovascular Disease at our university, and I'd like to give her the word.
Thank you. Dear candidate, first of all, of course, my congratulations with finishing your PhD thesis. Also, my congratulations to the supervisors. Well, I'm not an engineer, I'm a doctor, I'm a neurologist, and I do have a stethoscope. So I found your chapter 5 about the e-stethoscope very interesting. So let's go to chapter 5. The title of the chapter is The E-stethoscope enhances the detection of carotid stenosis and plaques compared to conventional auscultation. But I'm actually not convinced that you really showed what the title suggests. My question is, did you compare with conventional auscultation?
Highly esteemed opponent. Thank you for the question and for the nice compliments. So basically for this chapter, we did not really do a one-to-one comparison with the traditional stethoscope. And that was an idea actually that came later during my PhD. But my comparison is merely between what I saw in my data and what exists in the literature in terms of performance. So it was not one-to-one comparison indeed, but just the literature. And the title itself has been, simply we made a very minor change to it to just be very clear that indeed this was not a one-to-one comparison.
Yeah. So the title could have been more neutral.
Yes. Yeah. So that was done now in the paper. So the paper has that in it. Yeah.
Then the title of your thesis. The title of the thesis is developing screening tools for the early detection of carotid disease. And the primary aim in this chapter is to detect severe stenosis, more than 70% stenosis. So I was thinking, why did you choose the 70% stenosis as your primary aim? Because the aim of your book is to detect early disease.
Well, thank you for the question. So basically, when I say detecting diseases early enough, it means that detecting the disease before an event occurs. So detecting stenosis before we have a stroke. Because a lot of patients are, they're just at their home thinking they don't have anything while they do have the disease. So detecting plaque is indeed very important, and that was done as the secondary aim of the study. But detecting severe stenosis in itself is quite important because a lot of medical decisions are based are existing for the severe stenosis itself. So that was my main drive.
Yeah, well, do you know I think it's about 2 weeks ago, the results of the ECST2 trial were published. Mm-hmm. Do you know that trial, and can you shortly explain the conclusion of the trial?
Well, it just came across the study, to be honest, and if I'm just gonna state what I read from it, and if I'm wrong, please correct me. I think what the ECST2 did was try to compare if optimal medical therapy or if intervention basically would add any benefit to patients who has moderate, like more than 50% of stenosis with low to moderate risk of stroke. And they concluded that basically the intervention would not add benefit to this patient on top of optimal medical therapy.
Yeah, so my conclusion was, because in this trial it were asymptomatic patients, so the stenosis grade is not that important. You have to detect plaques, because then the best therapy is starting medication. So why would you screen for a 70% stenosis? And I think you miss an opportunity in all those patients that have 50% or 30% stenosis. You miss an opportunity for education and starting prevention. So it's again the question, why did you choose the 70% stenosis as the primary aim, or would you change it now?
Well, stating the primary aim and secondary aim is just, it's semantics, to be honest, because both of them were treated equally. I did the same analysis for both, for the severe stenosis and for the plaques. So it was a semantic indeed. And I did perform the analysis and got the results for the plaques as well. And the electronic stethoscope was performing a bit lower for the stenosis compared to stenosis. But in chapter 4, and the other device, the laser Doppler, performed better for the plaque detection. So again, I would say that it's just a matter of semantic.
Okay. Yeah, and you wouldn't advise yet to buy an EEG stethoscope. Should I buy an EEG stethoscope as a doctor?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Are we already there, do you think?
I think with the current performance for the electronic stethoscope, it's quite promising. And just from my experience, I mean, the quality of the signals and what you can do with them, that's something that we should benefit from, definitely, yeah.
I think we are not there yet, but I will consider buying a stethoscope. Or not using my normal stethoscope, but buying an e-stethoscope. Okay, thanks for the discussion, and I'm giving the word back to the prorector.
Thank you very much. Then the opposition will be followed by Professor Michi. He is professor in electrical engineering and signal processing systems at the Eindhoven University of Technology. And I would like to thank him that he joins us today from Eindhoven, and I'd like to give him the word.
Thank you, Mr. Prorector. And dear candidate, first of all, I'd like to compliment you and your promotion team on this nice book, providing important contribution, I think, for better care, especially in low and medium income countries. My questions will be a bit more on the technical side, and I would like to start with chapter 3, where you developed a nice mock circulation setup. And first of all, which is analyzed by laser Doppler vibrometry. First of all, my question is on the detrending that is applied here. Why do you observe a trend in your measurement, and why was 1 second moving window chosen? So why 1 second?
So, highly esteemed opponent, thank you for the question and for the nice compliments. So, what I saw in my signals is that there is sometimes a trend that could be line sometimes and could change a bit sometimes. And I think the laser itself is quite sensitive. So any motions that is coming from the building itself, it might get detected. So I think the drift that I saw is in general motion that has nothing to do with what I'm doing, but something that is coming from the environment itself. So that was the trend. And I chose the 1 second for the detrend. I tried a couple of options like 1 and 2, and I found out with 1 second, I basically get the trend removed from my signals with adequate quality. So.
I was actually thinking that the 1 second was also chosen because, but I'm not sure because I cannot find it in the book. The heart cycle, the simulated heart cycle is 1 second. Is it 60 beats per minute or is it different?
So there are a few options. So 60 beats per minute was indeed one of them. 1 hertz is the main frequency here, and we had lower frequencies. So yeah, 1 second would be around that.
Because then a window size could be adjusted to that. I think would also make sense.
You're perfectly right.
Well, let's say you also use 1 second I see for the spectral analysis as a window. But then I thought this was still, and I think it should be still related to the cardiac cycle, because you want to observe the frequency components that characterize that.
Yeah.
And then you go to a more, let's say, an analysis that is more meant to analyze time varying signals. Like, for instance, to look at the peak systolic frequency. For that, I assume you have used a short time Fourier transform, and you use, I assume, a smaller window, time window, but that is not, this is not exactly reported here. So I would like to take a look at equation 3.4, where you report the formula for the short time Fourier transform. And in fact, this cannot be entirely true, because you are summing on M, and you have also M on the as an argument of the result, so of the Fourier transform. So I guess there are a couple of typos in this equation. But in particular, so what is the length of W? So what's the time interval where you, in fact, apply the Fourier transform?
So I think in this analysis, I did indeed choose a shorter window, which I think it was 100 milliseconds for the analysis.
So a shorter one?
A shorter one,
yes.
Yes. A shorter window. Could you
because
repeat
you want to observe, you don't want to average one cycle, but you want to observe variation in the cycle, which will be represented in your time frequency representation.
Yes.
Then it will become clear.
Yes.
Well, let's say you are summing, it's just on the formula. I think there are some typos, because you are summing on M. So that means that M cannot be the argument of X. So the short time Fourier transform on the left side, that should be N. And the exponent should also have M, because you are summing also over the exponent to make a Fourier transform, in fact. But so this, I do see, so you're using a shorter window, that which yeah, indeed makes sense. Was not really clear from the text. Then. So this was all experimental, and then you moved also with towards measurements in patients, and then we are in chapter 4, and here you're using multiple sensors. But before you extract, in fact, the frequency features, you are kind of estimating the best channel, the best sensor, let's say, for your purpose. But you do it by correlation analysis. Could you think also more advanced techniques that can help you combine efficiently the signals coming from these different sensors?
So basically what I did in chapter 4 is not really selecting a single channel, but selecting a few of them. Like I do have 5 in my analysis, and I used a certain threshold for detecting the good channels. And I selected a few of them, then we did the analysis, and we combined the results later. Another method that was, I was contemplating is using the beamforming, and just merging the signals together. And we had our collaborators who were busy with it, but in my experience, I usually prefer to extract features from the signals themselves, combine the results later on. That's usually how I work. So I opted for doing it that way.
But for instance, you are actually using multiple sensors that are dislocated in space, trying to measure a common source while you have also other sources of noise. So isn't this actually a blind source separation problem, where you're trying to optimally combine your sensors in order to extract that one source and perhaps
I think,
remove.
Yes, I think maybe, yeah, it's also like plant source separation is a technique that I can use
Yeah,
for
so
future,
I was actually thinking this was a typical problem that you could approach with ECA, PCA, or even singular value decomposition, so this type of approaches.
Yes, I think that's something I could consider to improve further.
Now, all these features were developed for laser Doppler vibrometry. But then later, in chapter 5, you're also looking at signals from a stethoscope, so acoustic signals, but they are using exactly the same features, the same spectral features. So my question is, what is the meaning of these features in the one and the other application? Because you might have come up with totally different features, for instance, for audio signals compared to vibrometry. They're not representing the same physical source.
So, to me, the laser Doppler vibrometer is detecting the vibrations that are coming from the artery, and also the electronic stethoscope is measuring the vibrations that are coming from there. So, maybe there are other features that could do good work, but I found that this set of features is quite comprehensive to capture multiple aspects from the spectrum and to give us good estimates. So I think the current existing features would capture what I think is happening with the spectral broadening and with the stenosis.
Okay, thank you. I'm satisfied with the answer, and I give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you very much. Then without further ado, we're going to continue, and I'd like to give the word to Professor Lopata. He's professor in photoacoustics and ultrasound, also at the Eindhoven University of Technology, and I would like to give him the opportunity to discuss with you.
Thank you, Mr. Prorector. Dear candidate, congratulations with this thesis, also to the team. I really enjoyed reading it, and I think I can see how you're trying to bridge the gap between engineers that are always coming up with solutions that often tend to be very complex, whereas physicians are always looking for something that's easy to use and adequate. And you start off with imaging and you try to end up with even a stethoscope, and I think that's a very refreshing take on things. But when I was reading, I actually spent most of the time in chapter 2. I got a little bit stuck there. And I had the same with the propositions, proposition 1. Because I have a question, and maybe also a bit of a disagreement with you on proposition 1. So I would like to ask one of the seconds to read out proposition 1.
In research-limited settings, single M-line ultrasound emerges as a powerful and accessible tool, capturing age-related arterial stiffening with a precision comparable to its multi-line counterpart.
Thank you. So I agree that it's, as your results show, that it's comparable to multi-line, but is this really such a powerful and more accessible tool than just using a 2D probe nowadays with ultra-fast imaging capabilities, which allows you to measure the same properties in a 2D region? Can you defend your proposition?
Hi, esteemed opponent. Thank you for the question and for the nice compliments. I do stand by my proposition in proposition number 1, and the single M-line tool is indeed a powerful and it's more accessible tool. As you see, like you said yourself, the proposition is coming from the results directly in the chapter regarding the performance, of course. But I myself work with the tool, the single M-line tool. It's a tiny tool, very small. You really need very minimal resources to put it all together. In terms of price, it's way cheaper than what we have in the clinic and what we have as a POCUS, point-of-care ultrasound as well. So it's indeed a more affordable, more accessible tool for measuring stiffness.
But aren't you afraid that you introduce quite some problems at operator dependencies? Because, for instance, for localization of the artery, you're basically blindsided.
Correct, and I did touch upon that in the general discussion of the thesis, and I was really being critical with the method that when you don't have an image basically in front of you and you're blind, you don't know what you're looking at basically. But I must say that the device that was developed is quite smart. It's quite smart in a way that it really helps you to find the location. So you have a visual feedback in front of you of the screen to really guide you on what kind of signals you're seeing and where you should go in terms of putting your probe. So in terms of being blind, you are blind, but the algorithms are supporting you.
Okay. Next, you try to measure stiffness. So you have quite some data from the Maastricht study, which you analyzed, hundreds of patients, and you then use the motion tracking to come to a measure for the YEM, the carotid stiffness. But is there such a thing as a carotid stiffness? Or, I mean, the behavior of the wall is quite complex, or not? So what does this value that you measure tell you? And are there uncertainties in there that you should take into account?
So basically what I looked at here is two stiffness indices that were the distensibility coefficient and the young elastic modulus. And so one of them is looking at the structure, the other one is taking the wall thickness into account, and that's basically what was I looking for. It was very simple indeed. I was not taking the complicated, the complex, the sophisticated stiffness as other researchers or other techniques would. I was really looking only at the structural and material stiffness.
So aren't you afraid that there is a bias in there because of possible blood pressure differences between your patients?
Can I ask you to rephrase your question? So biases between?
Patients that are suffering from hypertension, for instance, versus normotensive patients.
So I would really like to go back to the goal of the study here, because the goal of the study is to compare between two methods in terms of their capabilities. So if one of them is biased by such things, the other one would have the same bias in it. So eventually, in the end comparison, that would not really matter.
Yeah, fair enough. In chapter 4, I read that also with a lot of interest, and then for me the main question now remains: you have this LDV technique. How would this compare to having a point-of-care ultrasound device? Because nowadays with AI, we can have a non-expert user. The scanner is just telling you to make sweeps over the carotid, and AI will just sort out the images and do the analysis. So it gives you the carotid, gives you the degree of stenosis. If you look at your results, how competitive is LDV with this really trend now in the market in ultrasound?
So I also touched a bit upon that in my general discussion. So I really put POCUS in the picture together with the devices that are being developed as laser double vibrometer and electronic stethoscope. I was very honest in saying that POCUS is performing better for detections. But the one downside with POCUS ultrasound is basically the training. You need to have training. You need to be, maybe with the new AI techniques, that might help you to be less dependent on the expertise, or that would be great actually. But POCUS is indeed in the picture, and eventually I have, I think, a paragraph, I don't really remember the number of it now, that it kind of advises on which device to use based on what you have. So if you really have a POCUS system that doesn't really need training or it does not need expertise, go for POCUS. POCUS ultrasound is performing better than these tools.
But maybe the LDV could be like a pre-assessment tool then, or?
Definitely, that's the goal of LDV. It's first line initial screening tool. So if you have a POCUS that is cheaper than it, and I really doubt that, that doesn't require training, you would go for it. But laser is just simpler to use, very easy, very small, tiny device.
Okay, can I have a final question? No? Okay, well then I'm satisfied with the answers, and I give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you very much, and I apologize. We move further to Professor Schulges. He is professor in biochemistry of vascular calcification from Maastricht University, and I'd like to give the word.
Thank you, Mr. Prorector, the candidate. Also, I had the pleasure of reading your thesis, and I did that with great joy. Congratulations, 5 published papers, 2 as a first author. And of course, I also like to extend these congratulations to your promotion team, because certainly they gave you some help. But you also forced me to really read the thesis, because I'm a biochemist, cell biologist, so looking at different aspects of vascular disease than you did. And I was intrigued by the part of the thesis that is most read, and this is not for me the acknowledgement, it's the title. And my colleague already addressed the second part of the title, but I wanted to have a discussion about the first 3 words of the title, bridging the gap. Very intriguing statement. What did you bridge? Did you bridge? And are you satisfied?
Highly esteemed opponent, thank you for the question and for the nice compliments. So bridging the gap here is really talking about the gap between high-income countries and low and middle-income countries, so resource-limited areas, where you don't really have the resources for sophisticated imaging equipment, such as ultrasound or MRI. So did I bridge? I think I made a step forward into bridging the gap. Am I satisfied? I think yes. With the time given to you, there's a certain amount of things you could do. And I think in the 4 years that were given to me, I'm quite satisfied with the current step in bridging the gap.
Yes, so you clearly brought something to the table to work on.
Yeah.
But our university uses prevention rather than let's say, late-stage disease curation. Mm-hmm. Would it not also be more helpful to do more education on preventing disease rather than on a late-stage detection of the disease, also in the low and middle-income countries?
So I think I also touched upon that in the general discussion of the thesis, and I was talking also about the importance of education in terms of prevention and how such tools could be useful in that regard. So when you do a field screening, and if you find something, and even if you don't find anything, you could just do a very brief education about what the disease is and how could you prevent it. Because a lot of people, they don't really know that they could prevent such diseases.
Yeah. Now I was intrigued by your chapter 1 because I start always with the introduction to learn a little bit, and I really liked the cycle that you made, and you also showed it in your presentation. And you said, okay, we have a conceptual phase, and then is it good? And it's no, you go back to the drawing table. Is it yes, then you move forward. Now your conceptual phase was tested in chapter 2, and then you move on with all the other development and a product phase and end of life phase with chapter 3, 4, 5. So everything depends on methodology and also selecting your patient population. Now a big difference between chapter 2 and the other chapters is that chapter 2 is based on arterial stiffness, and the other chapters is based on atherosclerosis, carotid atherosclerosis. Now, in your introduction, you write that they have common risk factors, and I do not agree. Can you explain to me why you think that arteriosclerosis, which is medial stiffening, versus atherosclerosis, which is intimal burden, plaque burden, has common risk factors or is more or less comparable?
I think my statement is basically coming from reading the literature. I mean, arterial stiffness and atherosclerosis, they have common risk factors, and most of them I showed in my first slide. Obesity or unhealthy diet or diabetes itself, when you read the papers about atherosclerosis, arterial stiffness, they are common between the two diseases. So my statement is coming from the literature, basically.
I think we can have a later discussion about this.
Sure.
But then in chapter 2, you use subjects from the Maastricht study. These are not really patients. These are people with pre-diabetes, and so we make them a kind of pre-patient. And then you say, okay, I can measure age-related differences, and you divide the population younger than 60 years and older than 60 years. But what you do is you do that on the basis of a chronological number. Whereas age could also be a biological number, meaning somebody of 60 years old can have vessels that are 40 years old and very elastic and healthy, or maybe even 80 years old vessels in a 60-year-old chronological age. So how do you define age in your population using that as a kind of denominator also in the later chapters? So would we not better look at biological age rather than chronological age?
I think you have a point there. I mean, biological age is quite important in terms of this, in terms of stiffness and everything. Someone who is young might have very old arteries, and the other way around. So it's indeed important, but And I was also hoping to do more, which is just to look at the age in terms of longitudinal study. But given what I had in my data, and that was just an additional analysis I wanted to do, given the data that I had at the moment, that was the analysis that I could perform at that moment. But looking at it from different angle, that was not possible for me at that point.
Yeah, it also relates to the question of the previous opponent, that hypertension, for example, could be a risk factor in there, and that a younger person has a higher stiffness rather than an older subject.
Yeah, definitely. But just given the data, I just wanted to make sure that, well, this is something that ultrasound does, multiple M-line ultrasound does, can single M-line do as well?
Yeah.
That was my question.
The device that you develop measures stenosis. Is the amount of stenosis the biggest risk factor, or should it be the composition of the plaque, which relates to my field of expertise, is just calcification?
I do agree with you. The composition of the plaque is quite important, of course. The stenosis is also important. I think both are important, to be honest. But at that point, I do ask myself the question, what can a screening tool do? A screening tool is a tool that doesn't really have imaging in it. And in order to get the plaque composition, you need an image to assess, basically. So I agree that plaque composition is quite important, but I think it's quite dreamy to ask a screening tool to look at that.
Yeah. So, final comment. So, bridging the gap, how close are we?
How close are we? Hopefully very close.
Okay.
Hopefully very close.
Thank you for the answers. I give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you very much. The opposition will now be continued by Professor Kooi. She is professor in medical physics and is particularly in vascular imaging at our university, and I'd like to give her the word.
Thank you, Mr. Prorector. Dear candidate, first I would also like to congratulate you with your thesis, and I would like to extend my congratulations also to your promotion team. I was very impressed by your thesis because you use a very wide diversity of techniques. And also, I really appreciate your mission to try to reduce the health inequality, because I think that's a very relevant topic that does not receive a lot of attention. So my compliments for that. But today, of course, I also have to ask questions, and my questions are about Chapter 4. So you developed a prediction model to predict the presence of plaque or the presence of severe stenosis. And generally, it's recommended when you develop such a model to include at least 10 clinical outcomes for each predictor in the model. And in your model, you have included 10 predictors, the features of the LVD signal. However, you have only 35 patients with severe stenosis. So I thought you could only include 3 features. So are you not concerned that your model is too optimistic because you have not corrected for overfitting?
Hi, esteemed opponent. Thank you for the question and for the nice compliments. So in the logistic regression model that I developed in Chapter 4, we indeed had 10 predictors, and I had 35 stenosis. And you are as limited as the patient who come to the hospital, because this study continued for more than 1 year, and this is the amount that we had at that point. I would not say that I'm afraid of overfitting, and here's why. So I used a method in my analysis called cross-validation. Mm-hmm. So cross-validation is a method that you use to basically have an external test set to test on it. This method kind of avoid overfitting, if I'm correct in my wording. So I'm not scared that my model is overfit. So if the model is overfit, the difference between the training performance and the testing performance would be really big. So I'm not really afraid of that here.
Okay, so I think you didn't use a really external validation set. You used like leave one out strategy, if I understood it well. If you would still want to select the appropriate features, then what kind of methods could you use to select the appropriate features? So if you want to reduce the number of features, do you have any thoughts about, which features to select and how?
Well, that was something that I was thinking about. So use some feature selection or selection techniques in my method, and one of them is just use the features that give the best performance, 3 of them or 4 of them, and combine them together. There are also other feature selection methods, technique available, and I was considering one of them, of course. But as I said, I eventually preferred using the 10 features because using a cross-validation kind of guaranteed to me that there is no overfitting. But feature selection methods were indeed, I was thinking about it and I was considering them.
Yeah, and what if you would consider that for future studies, what kind of methods do you think are important to select the right features?
So one method that I was thinking about is called principal component analysis. That's a method that kind of give you the features that maximize the amount of information that you have in the feature set.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of them. Others, that was the main one that I was thinking about, indeed. If there's any future work about it, maybe I can use that technique.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with you that principal component analysis could be used. And in addition, I was also wondering whether you assess the reproducibility of the features. If you perform a second measurement in the same patient, do you find high reproducibility of these features? Did you study that?
Not really. Look, at this stage, I was only looking at the performance of the feature. I did not really look. As a first study, I thought I outweighed the importance of the performance over the reproducibility. So maybe in the next study, I could look at the reproducibility of the method or the features. Yeah, but that was not done here, no.
Okay, thank you.
Yes?
Is there still time for a question?
Yes.
Okay, good. Right, so I was just also wondering, because you looked at, in this chapter, at pressure fluctuations that are transmitted to the skin.
Sorry, I didn't really hear you.
In chapter 4, you study pressure fluctuations which are transmitted to the skin because of the arterial pressure fluctuations. So I was wondering, the carotid plaque is heterogeneous and the composition can vary between different patients. So do you think the plaque composition will also affect these fluctuations that you measure?
I think it certainly does. I think if you have a plaque that have a thin fibrous scarf, for example, it might generate pressure fluctuation or signals that are different from others that do not have. And this is something we could indeed look for in future studies. But I think they will.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm satisfied with your answer, and I give the word back to the prorector.
Thank you very much. Then the opposition will be continued by Dr. Spronk. He is involved in the Department of Biomedical Engineering at our university, and I'd like also give him the opportunity to discuss with you.
Thank you very much. Congratulations on your beautiful thesis. This also extends to your team, of course. I want to start by asking a question about your discussion section, and in particular figure 7.3. So in this figure, you compare the frequency spectra of both LDV and the E-stethoscope. And you see clearly, as you also say, that the E-stethoscope has a broader spectrum. Now, one page further, you say that this may have a disadvantage as it may make the technology more susceptible to high-frequency breathing interference and hence necessitating a breath hold protocol. But I was wondering, isn't this a luxury problem to have? Couldn't you just filter out the high-frequency content and then end up with the same spectrum as for LDV?
Esteemed opponent, thank you for the question and for the nice compliments. I indeed observed that the spectrum of the electronic stethoscope is broader, and which means that you would detect breathing, basically. And you could not really use simple filtering to remove breathing from the signal, because there is a big overlap between breathing and the stenosis turbulence generation in terms of frequency. So simple filtering methods will not really work. That's why I'm saying it's a disadvantage. You need a sophisticated method to remove it.
So that means then that the frequency of the breathing signal is also in the lower frequency component.
Of the breathing signal?
Yeah, so your breathing interference basically also shows up lower in the frequency spectrum. Otherwise, it would filter out, right?
So basically, I would say that the spectrum of breathing is somewhere around, let's say, 200 hertz or something, and then it would extend up to 700 or more. And for the stenosis, it's around the 200 or something like that.
Right.
So the overlap is here.
Okay.
This is the overlap region.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Then I would like to ask you about a proposition, namely proposition number 8. So I would like kindly ask one of the paranymphs to read out this proposition.
The human ear fails to hear what algorithms can detect.
Thank you. So I was wondering, could you defend this proposition?
I think I could defend this proposition with the findings in chapter 5. As was indicated in an earlier discussion with Professor Julie Stahl, that we did not indeed perform a one-to-one comparison with the traditional stethoscope, but just from the results in the literature, we found that the electronic stethoscope is doing way better than the traditional stethoscope, and this is the origin of my proposition.
Okay, thank you. Then I would like to continue again on the discussion section, where you compare the performance of LDV with the e-stethoscope. And you specifically mentioned that your two techniques are developed for screening purposes. Now, if I then look at your summary results, basically, I see that the sensitivity of these new techniques varies from, say, 40 to 70, 78%. So let's say that it's on average 65%. That means that one of the 3 people with a stenosis or a plaque are undetected. So does that then is that sufficiently high for screening?
So that's actually a very good question, and something that we should think about, of course. But I usually look at it as you're not missing one person, but you are detecting the rest. So a screening is just for people who are not really aware of the disease at all. Yeah. So you are really gaining a lot of information. You are really a lot of people you are detecting. While if you don't do the screening, none of them is detected. Yeah. And I do think that this is sufficient for a screening, because when I think of a screening, it's usually the subsequent management for a screening, what it would be. So the patient who have the disease will get a subsequent test to see if they are indeed have the disease, yes or no, and if they need intervention, while the ones that are not detected, they basically go home. So I do think that this is sufficient for a screening test, because you are really gaining a lot of information that otherwise you would not have.
Mm-hmm. But isn't it then dangerous for those 1/3 where you do not detect it, that you send them home with a false sense of safety, basically?
That's correct, but I also think about it that way. All of them were at home with the false sense of safety before the screening, all of them. Yeah. And because of screening, some of them had the hope or knew that there is a disease that they could prevent from progressing, basically. So as I said, I compare it with not having the screening and what would be the consequence then. Yeah.
Thank you. Then I would like to continue to chapter 3, where in figure 3.3, you show sort of an overview. So this is on page 56, an overview of your results. And what I notice is that there's quite a lot of spread. So the dots are spread quite broadly over this figure. And so I have 2 sub-questions. One is, what causes this spread? So how are these individual measurements obtained? Well, what was I presume it was a repetition, but how did you do that? And so this is quite a controlled environment where you perform this, but despite this, you see this big spread. So could you comment on why there is such a big spread in an in vitro experiment or an ex vivo experiment?
So the spread is actually coming from the fact that we changed the pulse frequency and we changed also the flow rate.
Okay.
So with that, you do expect to see variation in the signal. If you have a higher flow, you would expect that the turbulence might change. You might get more turbulence produced. So that's why we get such distribution. So it's normal, I would say, for such changes in parameters.
Okay, that makes sense then, because I thought there were repetitions of the exact same experiment, but then, yeah, okay. Thank you. Then I was wondering in chapter 4 about the spectral entropy marker. So actually in chapter 3 you showed that to be the best performing metric, whereas in vivo in chapter 4 it's quite average or mediocre, so to say. So how do you explain the difference between the in vivo and the ex vivo performance?
I would explain the difference here, that this is actually patient data. So patient data is more susceptible to noise. Basically, there is a lot of variability, way more than that we created in the experiment. And
Dear Ms. Candidate, you are allowed to finish your answer, but you also can make a choice to stop here.
Thank you. So there's a lot of variability in patient data and a lot of noise that would create, I would say, a spurious entropies in rather low degrees of stenosis. This is why I think the entropy was not as good in the patient data as it was in the in vitro study.
Thank you very much, and I'm satisfied with your answers.
Thank you very much. Dear Ms. Candidate, dear Ms. Malik, the time appointed for defending your thesis has now officially passed. The degree committee will now withdraw to discuss the quality of your thesis and in particular the way you have defended your thesis, and we also take in consideration your presentation of this afternoon. And I request that you and your company here available await the results of all the deliberations and the return to the aula. Thank you very much.
The PhD defense has now ended. The degree committee will debate the candidate's performance behind closed doors. This process usually takes about 10 minutes.
Southside, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. All your time, 'cause I'll go the extra mile. Long road to the south side, 7 miles in my rearview mirror. I know what it felt like. My goals only getting clearer. East side to the west side. No place like home. If it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and die. On the dash, got my laces tied. Long road, I don't waste no time. Break rules because fate decides. With the team and we chase the light. I make a move, fall down, shake it off. I hate to lose, bad branch, break it off. No room for negativity, praise and love. Prepare for deep part cause we're taking off. Take the mileage, traveling so far from home. Gathering knowledge, other connections. I put the time in to get everything I ever hoped for. It's a challenge and we all in. It's a better future that we go for. Even though these nights seem long, I know that I am never on my own. Know you won the battle once you've grown. south side. 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Long road to the south side, 10 miles in my rearview mirror, I know what it felt like. My goal's only getting clearer, east side to the west side. No place like home, if it's questions that you've got, go the extra mile and that. Years can't fly by now, don't waste all your time. 'Cause I'll go the extra mile.
part that was most important.
Dear Ms. Malik, the degree committee here present has assessed not so much the quality of your thesis, that was approved, but we looked particularly to the way you have defended your thesis this afternoon and your presentation of this afternoon. And in view of its positive verdict and taking into account your previous qualification, the degree committee has decided officially to grant you the degree of doctor. Professor Delhaas is authorized to confer upon you this academic distinction in accordance to Dutch university customs, and therefore I invite you now, your supervisor, to take officially the floor.
Dear candidate, before I can confer upon you the degree, I would like you to answer the following questions. Do you promise to work in accordance with the principles of scientific integrity at all times, to be careful and honest, transparent, independent and responsible?
Yes, I promise.
By the authority vested in us by law and in conformity with the decision of the committee here present, I hereby confer upon you, Afrah Elfatih Farah Malik, the degree of doctor and grant you all rights attached by custom and law. As evidence of this, I now present you with the degree certificate signed by the rector, the secretary and the other members of the committee and affixed with the official seal of the university.
I give the word to Dr. Racing, who is going to speak out the official laudatio.
Dear Dr. Malik, dear Afrah, congratulations on your acquired doctorate. Of zal ik in gewoon Nederlands zeggen, van harte gefeliciteerd met je doctoraat. Heel goed gedaan. Het is mij en het hele promotieteam een plezier om je hier vandaag te zien staan, doen en zijn met al deze mensen hier aanwezig. Your thesis is aptly titled Bridging the Gap, because in addition to your thesis work, let us consider the following. One is the language gap you bridged. Your Dutch is this good. Yeah? Within 3 to 6 months after you joined our lab, I couldn't tell from your WhatsApp communications that with people from the master's study that Dutch was a new language. The discipline gap you bridged. Trained as an engineer with specialties in signal processing and artificial intelligence, you worked together with the technicians and staff of the clinical departments of neurology and neurophysiology in our hospital, and you recruited your own patients in Dutch for your measurements. The social gap you bridged. A few months after the start of your PhD with us, the corona pandemic struck and you had to sustain a lockdown with its solitude and stress. Our group's Triangles meeting online helped us all stay sane and productive, and your thesis' second chapter kept you busy. Some of the questions are answered by this fact, actually. The family gap you bridged. You moved here from Turkey with your family in Saudi Arabia, France, and at times in Sudan, your home country, where, very sadly, one of the world's biggest humanitarian catastrophes still continues. Surely this must have taken some toll. The sectoral gap that you bridged. Your main project took place in the multidisciplinary and multi-sectoral network inside, funded by the European Commission. So that is all quite amazing and worth remembering. So never forget that. And in full agreement with what your former mentor, Dr. El-Tayeb, once said. See her bio. Afrah, all the bridging also says a lot about who you are and what you bring. Taking a good look at the cover of your thesis, I see two slightly different landscapes, one grassy, one other rock with crevices, with people on both sides. You are very capable in seeing people with their differences, but in how you work with them, you show how you see them as people. Now that I mentioned working with people, let's recount some memorable collaborations. In work meetings with us supervisors, you quickly got into steering mode. You would come forward with an agenda and start the meeting on time, and often you had anticipated questions by having done relevant background analysis and the results ready on a slide. In the project and consortium setting, you never failed to deliver in a timely manner, and you have been supportive to many a colleague in and outside of our department, with expertise and as a real friend. And I will remember the time that you booked a 2-hour meeting with me on your introduction, then came in, gave me your first draft, and say, here it is. I was baffled, because it was a busy time, and all of a sudden I had 2 hours, sufficient time to read your introduction and get your feedback the same day. So you read very well what the people you work with need, and you use this to facilitate the work being done. Very professional. I think, and others would agree, that this does extend to outside of work as well. When we interviewed you online, you were quite stressed and you rushed through your slides and questions and answers. You hadn't experienced or realized yet that people can really listen and learn from you if you take the space and pace. If you do, you won the Best Paper Award after delivering a great talk in a packed room last year at IEEE MEMEA conference. Today again, you demonstrated your independence with critical and constructive thinking and a capacity to widen others' views around biomedical technology and its role in global health and society. Let me wrap up with a kind proposal from my side. I'd like to suggest a revision to the already beautiful cover of your thesis. To me, your name sits too low between the rocks and peoples. Yes, it shows how you build your work and influence, but really 90% of this thesis came from your creativity, your perseverance, thinking, and working through. So to me, your thesis is also, and that extends to the Commission here, is also a touching reflection of la condition humaine. Therefore, can we have, in the back of the picture, a big-hearted, Buddha-like Afrah with arms wide, bringing together, with a smile, those worlds, with empathy, knowledge, and wisdom. I hope you really feel this. I'm really proud of what you've achieved and how. I would like to congratulate your family, wider family, and circle of friends, and frankly, all here present today. Well done, and it is done, Afrah. Enjoy your new title and role, and as a team, we wish you a fruitful and purposeful future. Let's celebrate, and I'll hand back to the Pro-Rector.
So, dear new young doctor, how does that feel?
I would say it needs some time to think.
Okay, that's an answer I didn't expect it, but that's okay. That's a nice thing. So, also on behalf of Maastricht University and of our board of directors, I would like to officially congratulate you with your new title. That's basically in the Netherlands the highest academic degree you can receive, and I think you should be very proud of it the way you have received it today. And in my congratulations, I also bring forward your promotion team, sitting opposite of me, who guided you in the last 4 years and who really brought you to this achievement today. In my congratulations is, of course, also your family. I have no idea who the family is, but there are a lot of people in the first row. And maybe there are some families who are viewed your presentation online. So that's basically another opportunity because it's recorded. I also would like to thank the members of the Corona who prepared questions, who asked you sometimes difficult questions. And they also that some of them, they came all the way from Eindhoven. I would say all the way, it's just 95 kilometers. It's really not a big distance. But anyway, it's outside Limburg, we call it. Okay. Phrase like this. How to proceed? We are going to make, as a team here, an official picture on the stairs of our university. The audience itself who are sitting here, they don't have to wait. They can bridge the gap between our coming and their coming already with a first coffee or tea or whatever they have in the rafter, and we will join you there in about 6 minutes. And by that, I officially close the ceremony. Thank you very much. We trekken je 6 minuten vooruit officieel.
Zeg je?
We maken voor de foto officieel 6 minuten.